All right, so welcome to the Arts Lunch at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. I'm Jennifer Oz Freeman. I'm the Assistant Professor and Program Director for Theology and the Arts. And today we are really happy to have some of the artists who contributed to the Stations of the Cross exhibit, virtual exhibit and liturgy, which occurred last week and can be found on our blog. And we're excited to hear from you and have some conversation about these images and texts. There were also poems as well and some video pieces. So without further ado, I think we'll get right to it. Oh. And start with station number 2. Let me find my share screen. And
okay.
Is that good? Okay.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me? I can't see myself, but anyway. Hi. I'm Kara Hochhalter, and I graduated from the seminary in 2008. And so anyway, I was excited to be able to create an image for this show, so beautifully put together by all of you. When I thought about Jesus carrying the cross, I didn't want to have showing a naked man with being whipped and with his head down. I thought of Jesus proudly holding his head up and his heart, demonstrating this incredible love that he had, that he would not compromise who he was as a person of love. And so that's why I had the heart very visible there. And then as you all know, when you create a piece of art, sometimes things appear even unintentionally. So I realized that his leg, the position of his leg, looks like it's become one with the cross. And so I started thinking about how the cross has become a symbol for Jesus himself, which has kind of bothered me because it holds up the horrible crucifixion aspect of his life rather than the incredible love that he lived. So I'd love to hear what other people see in the image. There are more things, but I really love to hear what other people see when they look at this.
Thank you. Is this a little flower down
Yeah.
the stone? I wasn't sure.
Yeah. So kind of a lily like flower.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Carl says like the dynamic sort of explosive background. Yeah, it feels very energetic, or there's a lot of movement, I suppose, when I see this, and the really strong diagonal of the cross.
Mm-hmm.
But like you described, it doesn't feel, I think in some of the other, it doesn't feel weighty, or in some of the kind of like other traditional representations. There's this kind of forward movement.
Yeah, well, this is charcoal. So the dark charcoal sort of made me feel like the crown, the harsh spokes of the crown. But then on the right side, when I looked back at it, I thought, oh, those almost look like wings, maybe sort of angelic, a softer look.
Yeah, I'm really taken by the line work. There's so many different kinds of line work, but I think my focus is very much drawn to that back leg, kind of like that contrast is so strong there, the back leg next to the cross. And just how, you're talking about the conflation of his body with the cross. And when I see your image, I really see sort of that wrestling with it, and the cross kind of melts into the background a little bit too, like half of it you can't even see it because it's in the background. So I really appreciate how the line work and how the shading really pushes against the way those two things have been conflated over time.
Thank you.
Someone just mentioned that it looked vegetal in the background, and I see palms. I see those
Oh,
walls almost like there's been this progression from Palm Sunday
mm,
in the background, and now here we've advanced to this day.
nice.
Lots of great. I don't know if you have your chat open, but there's lots of great comments in the chat as well.
Well, I can only see part of the chat. Well, one other thought when I look back at it, that his back leg is kind of firmly pushing off on the rock, but then his other leg moves sort of into a liminal space.
Yeah, it looks like he is in the act of stepping into that little void there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like to Elizabeth mentioned the foreshadowing of Easter
Mm-hmm.
sun rays, and Elizabeth O talks about the joy of it as well. Yeah.
Along with that kind of purposeful, you know, head up, chin up kind of look. I just love how it has that feel of him. Like, I'm just going to grab this cross, we're going to go, and we're going to go with it. And kind of, you can almost feel like if you've ever dragged something kind of over your shoulder, you kind of can just feel that sense of like, all right, grabbing this heavy thing and we're going. I kind of love that dynamic that is a part of what people have been saying.
He wasn't whimpering in this image anyway. Well, thank you. It's nice to hear your comments.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for this image. We'll keep on, but we can always, like I said,
Yeah.
can return
Right.
to things as the conversation goes.
Oh, so
Yeah. Right. Elizabeth O.
So this is station 3 where he stumbles for the first time. And I was thinking a lot of stuff, but one of the things I was thinking of is how all of these extinctions that are happening really feel to me like our source of life kind of stumbling on the way to more suffering. And so I have him with an ibis on one side and a rooster on the other. I am a chicken farmer, so there's birds. Yeah, and this ibis is very endangered, and this is an extinct kind of chicken. And I chose those birds because in the book of Job it says, "Who gave wisdom to the ibis and knowledge to the rooster?" And so I really believe in like the knowledge and the wisdom that each living thing is carrying, and even the non-living things, like the things that we think of as non-living, like soil, which it really is living, or like different you know, air things like clouds and storms and stuff. Like I've always sort of felt the presence of God's wisdom manifest and shared with and through all these things. So the sort of form of this was modeled after this mosaic in the what's now a mosque, but was a cathedral called the Hagia Sophia. And the real picture, it's kind of like this because it has this arc of gold, and Jesus is in the middle, and there's emperors on each side of him, except instead of the emperors, I have the birds, and the emperors are bringing gifts in the, you know, in the real mosaic. But I feel like they're also like we're also always being gifted by this the gifts of God that are shared through the living things that are always surrounding us. And so thinking about Jesus on the way to the crucifixion, it did my heart good to think about him being surrounded, like it was outside, so there would have been birds, you know, and so it was like this reflection of the Magi that greeted him with gifts when he was a baby, which is sort of what that mosaic reminded me of, like the emperor's bringing gifts. It was kind of like the Magi, but like it went like in the time of the crucifixion, he would have been gifted with the presence of birds, because it's really hard to have a place without that, right? Which is one of the miracles of being alive, really. And so also in this, in the original mosaic, see those extra kind of circles that have some writing in them? There's like, it's like these hieroglyphics called the Mother of God, because in the original one, it's Mother Mary holding a baby Jesus, but it's the kind of, I just used it as a way to both harken back to that original mosaic and then add another dimension of what I'm trying to say, which is these letters are kind of, I don't know, stylized, but it says all things through him, no thing without him, which is from the beginning of the Gospel of John, where it talks about, you know, I guess I should have pulled it up, but you know, about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and through him all things came into being. Without him nothing came into being. That's not exact, but that's basically. And so talking about again, like the presence of Christ in all things. And so so also these in the original one, they talked about these emperors. They're like these words that like talked about how amazing they were. And so I gave the birds their words. Endangered northern bald ibis, the keeper of wisdom, and the extinct white Holland rooster, the keeper of knowledge. And to know, like, right, because like I have chicken, like I'm a chicken farmer, right? So I've thought about the special kinds of gifts that different chickens especially can give us. And so like I'm not as connected with the northern bald ibis, but I think it's very beautiful. But with the rooster, like I know that this kind of rooster is a kind of rooster that is much better suited to a non-industrialized farming setup, right? Like even for us, like if we're gonna have layers, we need chickens that lay a lot, or we're just gonna hemorrhage money, right? If we have chickens that we're raising for meat, we need them to have a lot of meat, or again, like it's just gonna plow us under. We're gonna lose everything. But like if you were raising just for your family, you'd probably want chickens that could have their own babies and make some eggs and also make a nice meal for you. But that's this kind of rooster. This breed did that, and it's a kind of knowledge and support that it gives us, a kind of nourishment. Yeah. So those are some of the thoughts I had about that. I had to model Jesus on someone, and my 9-year-old was the one who I could get to lie down on the floor. It's modeled after him, but he had kind of a fierce look because that's how he is. So I really appreciated like the fierceness in the face, in the eye that's not hurt for Jesus there.
That's
Yeah.
lovely. Yeah, that's lovely. And I liked hearing more too about I know you had mentioned before the kind of reference from the mosaic and Hagia Sophia. So it was helpful. I mean, now like as you're describing that and explaining all that, like I can see it even more than before. So I love that. Well, you know, I'm biased and love Hagia Sophia, so I also love that interaction with that as a kind of source material. Right. Yeah, and there's several comments in the chat.
Elizabeth, I love how you are lifting up the gaze of non-human beings in this. And it's just kind of like blowing my mind right now to think about all of these stations from the perspective of like not just the humans, but what else was going on in the broader landscape. And yeah, just thinking about the birds making noises and looking at this scene and other creatures potentially. And the fact that, yeah, like it was outside. There were more people in this community and involved in this story than I think are often included. And that sounds really simple when I say it out loud, but I had never really considered that. So I'm really appreciating the fact that these two birds are like, they seem to be like holding a greater wisdom in this, the way that they're sort of positioned, that they're like holding a different perspective, I guess, and a different way of knowing and being in this whole saga. So I'm just really appreciating that. And I'm wanting you to do the other stations, and I want to see what other birds or other creatures you would choose for these other stages. But yeah, thank you so much for bringing that into it.
Great. And Carl just put in the chat too, referencing the mirroring of the dove of the Spirit, blessing Jesus at his baptism. And then Monique had a great comment too in the chat, bringing in the other species is so very powerful. There's something about birds, the way they're not earthbound like us. Yeah. I mean, when you think about the Gospel of John, you know, the evangelist symbol for John is the eagle, exactly because of that, the kind of cosmic bird's eye view of the Gospel of John, right? Like in the beginning was the word, and we get this totally different perspective than the other Gospels. They're not earthbound, so that works well here. Really powerful to hear your own experiences with birds and how our economic systems have defined value on so many levels. That's great. Okay, well, I want to be mindful of our time. So thanks so much, Elizabeth, and we'll process on, as it were, if I can make this go forward. Here we go. Don't think Suzanne is here. So we'll keep on, although this is a lovely image.
Okay.
Max,
Oh,
do you want me to zoom? Well, let me
yeah.
know. Okay.
Yeah, if you can just zoom in so that basically one row would fill
Okay.
the screen. It should be able to zoom in pretty far. The photos are pretty big files. Yeah, I think that works. So this is an art piece, but I think I'll read my statement before going into too much of the detail. I don't know if the statement will really help, but it kind of sets a mood. So this is my statement. Begins with two quotes, and then the statement itself are two short poems. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna copy and paste them into the chat so you can read along. Let's see if that works. Great. So they've got a line around the corner. Guys are buying 3 pies apiece from Revenge of the Nerds, 1984. And I've cut off Heather Chandler's head, and Heather Duke's head has sprouted in its place like some mythological thing my 8th grade boyfriend would know about. Heather's, 1989. Medusa crucified. Perseus forced my chin, split me from my body, sampled an unsimple thing, sapped me with tricks. Give head to heroes, huh? Become a trophy. Unless I am a talisman, a guard from Gorgon, not only used but useful, shield for cocksure boys as serpents in the sea, and all her grottos birthing dark antitheses are strangled in their thighs. Am I a talisman or trophy, O sons, O heroes, O sires of kingdom come? And then Veronica emboldened. To grasp a man and woman's fabric, powerless and empowering, bodiless but bleeding, love him, diminish him, scrunch the face, wet it, wring it, quench headaches from beggar to emperor, Rome will yield the greatest profit. So the first thing that might help with the artist statement is there are certain references that I'm playing with in PyCons, a visual mythography, on the miracle of Saint Veronica and other symbolic decapitations. And the first is there was an immediate link for me seeing some of the images of Saint Veronica, which I will put in the chat, in art history. Why won't it copy and paste? Well, I don't know why Zoom won't let me copy and paste this link, but let's see. All right, let me do this one and this one. Okay, that's weird. And then I immediately was thinking of the sort of strength of this image of Veronica holding a fabric with Jesus's face on it, and how much it reminded me of this idea of the shield with Medusa's head on it, particularly Caravaggio's, which I'm trying to put into the chat. But the main thing is, I know there's a particular context to the myth, although it's an extra biblical story. It's not in the Gospels, this particular station, but it has a very rich art history, and history in iconography. In particular, that she could cure the emperor with this image of Jesus's head kind of captured on this piece of fabric. So I was thinking, what does it mean to capture a face or a head? And it's hard for me. I know that the context isn't necessarily, it's a miracle this head appears on the fabric, but there's something violent in the image to me of someone holding a head without a body. Especially as someone who didn't grow up knowing the story, but having seen the artwork of the Veil of Veronica. And then thinking about that in context of Caravaggio's Shield of Medusa, which is referenced right at the top here. So this top one really is the most specific references. The right image is that Allison painted, is directly inspired by some of the images from art history of what Jesus looks like on the veil. And then this is a Jesus that I painted on the left here, inspired by Caravaggio's Medusa, which are very different emotions, I would say. So Jennifer, you can start scrolling down a little bit. Maybe the next two can be in there. So I got really interested in this idea of symbolic decapitations, and what does it mean? What does it do when these people, these artists, and also these characters are holding this head, are using the head? Is it to heal? Is it a trophy? Is it personal? Is it to show other people? Is it something that you keep to see yourself? And then I got in this weird rabbit hole of like, how does this kind of work in America and US myth and US imagery? So it's a bunch of references, and I'm seeing how they might speak to each other, really. So there's a lot of 80s movies, there's certain historical events. So Clash of the PyCons is the name of one of these. And that's a 1980s movie, Clash of the Titans, which references Medusa. It's about Perseus killing Medusa. And so there's a Jesus on the left here based on Harry Hamlin playing Perseus. And then again, another image of Jesus on the right there. And again, the idea is that these are two Jesuses. But why pies? And Jennifer, if you can scroll down to the next two. And yeah, actually that's great. So I'm seeing how putting different things, it's sort of like collage. It's like, I don't know if these things will necessarily speak to each other, but what if they do? So I have the 80s, late 70s through the 80s as a kind of time period that I'm working with in the US and putting it in conversation with art history, specifically Caravaggio and the Veil of Veronica. Caravaggio's Medusa and the Veil of Veronica. So Heathers, the main sort of hero of that movie, is named Veronica. And then there's this line that I read in the artist statement about how she's working to try to get rid of these sort of evil clique, these sort of evil girls at the school who run this clique, and how it's like a hydra or another sort of thing where you keep cutting off the head. So that was it, part of the inspiration. This next one, Baby Won't You Ride, is inspired by Heavy Metal, the movie Heavy Metal, and sort of the objectification of women in that movie, but also just this like of like as a trophy. If you can scroll down. So these two have other important references historically. So Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory is the name of Anita Bryant's memoir. Anita Bryant being being a spokesperson for orange juice, but also against LGBTQ people, and was pied in 1970. I don't remember the date. But there's a famous event where she was talking about all the evil things that gay people are and do, and then a gay activist pied her. So that's where some of this pie thing comes from. I thought of that as a kind of, that's another symbolic decapitation, pieing someone. It's maybe silly or weird, but in that particular moment historically, it had a very political and powerful impact as well. I'm also being a little juvenile with or embodied with my, I'll put it that way, with my titles, and sort of playing with, there's violence, there's sexuality, there's play, and there's not, and then there's horror, and there's all these things kind of happening at once. The line "That's My Pie" is from Revenge of the Nerds, which is one of my least favorite movies, but it's a great dialogue partner, where there's a scene where these nerds are raising money by selling pies, and there's just foil with whipped cream in it. And the jocks are like, why are they making so much money? And it's because they have the naked image of one of the girlfriends of one of the jocks on the bottom of all the pies. So it's all these dudes, straight dudes buying these pies to get this naked lady. And so then this is a Jesus and based on the pose of that movie. But that kind of framed the whole piece. So each of these pie cons is painted on a foil pie dish, and playing with is this something you buy? Is this something you sell? Is this a trophy? Is this a talisman? Is this a shield? Is this something you consume? So all of these things are kind of at play. So that's pie cons. Ideally, there will be a 2.0. This was conceived as a physical installation where there'd be a table with the pie plates out, where there would be some recordings from those movies, from those references kind of playing in the background. So hopefully there will be a 2.0 that's more of a installation.
Nay, there will be a 2.0. I think it needs to happen. Well, there've been a few, comments in the chat, but also any like comments or questions before we move on to the next station.
I was just going to comment that, the thing that came immediately also to mind was just this idea of that impression of the faces you pied. So I love how that ties in with everything you're doing too for this particular station, just the idea of like what's left in the pie plate, the pressing of a face into something. And I don't know, Cool Whip sounds yummy to me, so.
It was surprisingly heavier than I thought it would be, the Cool Whip. we all notice. If you notice some of the like why some of the eyes are either like pretty much closed or like really open, it's because it was pretty heavy on the eyelids.
That's good to know, I guess. Yeah. Quality. Great. Anything else before we move on here? It's just yeah, such you can imagine, I suppose, the impression and the sensation of emotionally heavy Cool Whip. I like that. That's great. Okay, let's continue. Don LaRue. Oh, I think I have to zoom out before I can move on, maybe. Carl.
Yeah. So because I was halfway through the stations, number 7, I wanted one that the viewer had to dwell on. And I really like dot to dots in general because they give a person without skill at drawing a semblance of a skill at drawing and can allow one to pretend they can draw for a while. And I also like them because they kind of look like constellations. There's something very cosmological about them. And the stations of the cross themselves being 14 sequential numbered things kind of are their own dot to dot. And so I did a dot to dot of just a pretty traditional representation of the 7th station. I think you might be kind of zoomed in, at least on my screen. I can only see the left side. Maybe I'm mistaken. I'm using a tablet, so maybe it's just cutting off half the screen. Yeah, if you want to see the whole thing, you're going to have to do it, or I don't know if it's visible, but this is what it looks like when it's done. I don't know if it's in frame. Can everybody see it? Okay. Yeah, so it's a Roman, the baddie over here stabbing Jesus with a spear, and him being on the floor, and Simon of Cyrene helping out. I also really like the 7th station. The reason I chose it, I've never actually done the Stations of the Cross, but it's the only one that I knew by name at the beginning of this project, both because I really like it because it shows a person hurting a person who's suffering and a person who's helping someone who's suffering. And we're all presented with that choice pretty much every day. And also it's mentioned by name in an episode of Dairy Girls, and that's why I knew its name. Okay, that's all I've got.
That's great. Yeah, I like the cosmological connection as well. Something I hadn't thought about, but of course, like visually makes sense. And you could argue, couldn't you, that a dot to dot is its own little processional, kind of imaginative journey, that the image is emerging. If you don't know what the image is when you start the dot to dot, there's some nice discovery that can happen. It's lovely. I've already told Carl that I expect him to contribute to our Queer Theofuturism coloring book in October of 2021. So we've got that signed up. Anybody else? Any comments or questions for Carl?
Hey, Carl, can you pronounce your last name for me?
Yeah, in English it's Bjornerud, and in Norwegian it's Björnrud.
Okay. This particular station might end up being the raw material for my Good Friday sermon, so thank you.
That's great. Monique commented, love how it invites interaction. I've never really thought about also, a dot to dot as an image itself, the incomplete version, but as that like operating as an image. So I just really liked this concept too. Yeah. Great. Well, we can keep on going. I know I'm mindful of the time. We still have several more to get through, so we can come through this. Thanks, Carl for this awesome station. And there we go. Oh, I bet I've come to the end. Hold on. This group. Okay, who's next? That was Station 7. Micah, what station are you?
I'm the one where Jesus addresses the daughters of Jerusalem. I'm not
That's
sure
8.
what the number is.
Yeah, that's 8. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a group of your, I put all of your images up so we could like go
Cool.
through them individually, or I don't know if there's one that you would want to have up while you're setting it up for us.
Yeah, you can just show the overview and then we can click through some of the smaller ones.
Okay.
And I can show you, this is the scale of the painting. It's on canvas. It's a collage. So this was interesting because I'm unfamiliar with the Stations of the Cross anyways, because when I was a Christian, I was a Protestant. And then particularly this one was very strange to me because it's not something that I think of when I think of the Passion story, when Jesus says, don't weep for me, weep for your children. And then he says some really horrifying things about like bad things happening in the future, which is like, reminds me of the rapture and the end of days and all those kind of things that I used to be afraid of. But the line that really struck me was where he said, don't weep for me, weep for your children. And basically, if they do this when the tree is green, what will they do when the tree is dead? And as I thought about that, I thought about how so many people have used the story of Jesus to harm their children. And for myself and so many of my friends and peers who experienced Christianity as a form of spiritual and emotional abuse. And so I kind of wanted to say, hey, look, you guys are all fucking sad about Jesus being dead, but you're killing your own kids. Don't weep for me, weep for your children, as Jesus said. So this piece was just trying to get at that feeling. It was, I've been painting in this style on and off for a number of years. But this particular piece was kind of inspired by something I saw at the Walker earlier this month. It's their special exhibit by this German woman who does all kinds of stuff, including painting on pleather. And I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but she did a lot of kind of like visceral collages with big chunks of dark paint and stuff. So I was like, yeah, I should try my hand at collage and painting together and see what comes up. So some of the elements that I've collaged into this, you can see I have these huge Bible dictionaries that I got from the books that were being thrown away cart at United last spring. And I used them for my cross sculpture that I did last year for the Stations of the Cross. And so I still had those on hand. So I ripped out some of the pages for Jerusalem and put those on there. And then one of those pages was a map of the city of Jerusalem, and I ran it through the printer and printed that "Weep for Your Children" on it, and did that a couple times. And then hold on this image here. This image is a picture of me as a child, and you can kind of see it in the background. It's one of those things where you don't really see it, and then you do. And so I found this picture of me as a toddler, because one of the things I've done a lot in therapy as part of my recovering from spiritual abuse is like inner child work and trying to go back and find that inner child. And heal him. And so I wanted to have his face there, but kind of in a way where it's like, I don't know, kind of reminds me of those like missing child posters, because for a long time he was a missing child. And then if you go back 1 or 2 clicks, yeah, go back one more. So this part, I just took the page from the Bible, and it's the same Bible that I read all through high school or after high school when I lived in a cult center, and I was memorizing the Bible and read through it every year and all this stuff. Same Bible I had nailed to the cross on the sculpture last year. So ripped it off the cross, found the page that had this in it, and tore it out. And that's what you can see there, where that's actually the verse that is for the Station of the Cross. And then the rest of it is just paint that's finger painted, mostly splattered, smeared around, that was just trying to capture a little bit of the grief and anger for the spiritual abuse that has happened because of people who follow Jesus.
Thank you, Micah. Thanks for pointing out the face too in that image, because I think in the I hadn't seen it actually when I was like assembling things. And if you haven't seen it already, the video version of the Stations of the Cross 2, Micah provided like a video view of this, so it helps to get a sense of the texture as well. And is this gold paint?
Yeah, I have no patience for mixing colors, so I just take it right out of the bottle and sling it on there. So I just used red and gold and black and white.
So I can, the red and the black, I can see, because, like the kind of, red of the violence, and then also, because of course, obviously you have a red letter Bible here. So that the red also feels like a reference to that in some way. I'm kind of curious, like if there was, I guess I'm curious about the motivation for the use of the gold, because of course, like gold historically often denotes like holiness or like a spiritual space or so I'm curious if you had any like kind of intention about, or yeah. What do you think about the gold? I guess that's my question.
I think it looks cool.
That's cool too.
And it's a lot of the other paintings that I've done, I've worked exclusively in black and white and gold. I just love the way that it looks. And so it's kind of been the language that I've used for my abstract paintings in the past. And this picture doesn't really, especially this picture, doesn't do justice to it. But when the light hits it, it can really pop. And so I just really love the effect of using that, especially in contrast with the matte black.
Yeah, totally. Max just said in the chat, struck how the pencils make it so that the words "weep for your children" are negative space with the Bible pushing, filling, moving through. Also thinking about the ways that people are uncomfortable with emptiness. Yeah, so there's like interesting where you have like layering up of materials, but then also a feeling of negative space or emptiness. And I think the texture from that photo of yourself, I initially read it in some of them as like a screen, or because it's the pixelation or whatever, the graininess of it.
Yeah, I wanted especially to have that face. Like the reason that I did the text as negative space instead of just having it be like black letters on there is because I wanted to kind of have, especially that face, be kind of hidden in the background. So, because I think so often with religious trauma, it's not immediately evident. It's often very hidden, both culturally and in an individual's life. You don't realize the toll that is being borne by children who grew up hating their sexuality or fearing hell or fearing the wrath of God, or feeling like they had to be perfect, all these different kinds of ways in which the Jesus religion has been turned traumatic for us. So I wanted to have it be there in the background and kind of coming through the warning that way.
I just wanted to add something because I just really noticed it now, but I think in the earlier portions of when I looked at it, I maybe thought of it. But even though the saying is weep for your children, I love how that why is kind of buried and receding. So really I start seeing weep for our children, and that collective, to me, that really stood out. All of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that collective care for all kids, and ties into my own strong feelings about our school shooting problems.
Yeah.
And so I just all of a sudden was like, oh, I love this. I got to say this before I forget. So
Yeah, thank you for
wonderful.
mentioning
I love
that.
it.
That was for sure a lucky accident. With this, I didn't really plan at all. I just started slapping stuff on there and just kept adding paint and then more elements and then more paint and more elements. And so when I made stencils and stuck them on there out of sticky material and then spray painted over and peeled them off, but I didn't really know what it was going to look like till I peeled them off. And so when I saw that too, where it's like, it's not just individuals. So I loved how that turned out. And Stephanie, yeah, I think the spiritual value of gold, and I'll say that from now on, because art is theology and I should have a better reason than just because I like it.
No, I think you can also like it, and I'm sure iconographers also just liked it. But I think that I think what Stephanie's point highlights too is like there is spiritual value to the deconstruction work that you're engaging in, you know, at seminary and beyond and whatever. So I think like I do like that tension, and I think it does work to signify when I read this image, like that there is still a spiritual value here. There is something that is makes it much more dynamic than if it was just a black and white image and you weren't using the gold. I think the gold does something symbolically. And I wanted to, Ben had put in the chat earlier too that the dot matrix, I think effect of that image makes it dissolve and reappear. So there's kind of like an active nature to that choice too, which I think was really strong. Art is also art.
I think part of the reason I like gold also is because I didn't want this piece to be too, I didn't want it to immediately feel like gory or doomy or like too depressing. Because for me, like I have been able to weep for my children, weep for the child within me, and then through that to reclaim and reconnect and bring life back to that child. And so I didn't want people to just look at it and be like, it's so depressing, because there also is a whole element of that there is, once you recognize the ways that religious trauma has killed our inner children or wounded them, then there's tremendous possibility for growth and healing and resurrection.
Side note, Micah, have you ever taken a printmaking or bookbinding class?
I have not.
Well, at some point you should look at the offerings at the Minnesota Center for Book Arts,
Okay.
because I think you would like it.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we'll move on to our next station, which is Elizabeth's.
I'll wait. I'll try to be quick. I'll wait until the image is up.
Yep.
So yeah, I did station number 9, and I knew kind of out of what was left to what I could start seeing I wanted to work with. I'm new. I've heard of Stations of the Cross, but I'm new to actually kind of understanding and knowing each individual station. But for Jesus falls for the third time, I wanted to really go with this idea of capturing kind of the weight and heaviness of falling by the third time, and just kind of imagining in a non-full figure way by that point in time the pain and the heaviness of it, of the third time. So I think the symbolism of 3 is pretty obvious there. There's a little more recent influence of pointy arch imagery happening this semester. So I wanted to capture it kind of in this just dark space behind each piece. So my work is actually, it's made up of a print, a mixed media print that I had actually made in a different context. And one of the things I've really enjoyed recently is taking some things I have made in the past and reworking them in different ways and in different meanings. But this one in particular worked well because it kind of captured some of the symbolic elements from the previous context into this one for the station. So some symbols of definitely love and symbiosis are part of this print. In its original context, there was a tarot card reference to 3 of Swords, if I'm remembering right, which that might, now that I've said it, be a little bit obvious where. And so I wanted to recombine this in thinking about that heaviness of oppression. And so I loved, it was not planned, but I really loved the liturgy that went with it if you watch the actual video, because I kind of wanted to, in a lot of my work, I have a lot of rainbow references on purpose. And so just capturing both a sense of pain and tears, but also cleansing, and toying with the ideas of, I kind of toy with things and let it dangle in a literal sense of kind of the ways things both oppress, but also have been the liberating or spiritual force to be of comfort and help. And so it's kind of toying with that idea as well. In my particular Protestant tradition, when we talk about the crucifixion and Jesus, we often talk about it, or at least in what I've grown up with, as this wasn't just, you know, one group of people at a specific time and place in history as part of the role of sending Christ to the cross, that we all play this role in doing that. And so it's kind of a push-pull between the pain of it, the horror of it, the idea that it's undesirable, but then the idea that, at least in my context, why we call Good Friday, the aspect of it where we are involved, but also how important it is for the healing. If anyone, I don't want to take too much time, if anyone's interested more later in kind of the different print processes, it's actually a double-sided print, and in our online exhibition context, it worked really well to play with some of the imagery where you're actually seeing some of the double-sided images coming through, like on the left side, the sort of faint white heart, you're actually seeing, if you can see that it's a little, sorry, I'm trying to like point at the screen like that's gonna help you see anything. It's a little, you see like maybe some little circular lines in the middle of that white pale heart. And so that's actually the reverse of the heart that you see dangling with the 3 swords, basically, which has its own obvious symbolic element. But yeah, that's all I want to say.
That's great, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Oh, sexual plant on the left. Oh, so my symbols of like love and, you know, like God's love, Jesus's love, that's mistletoe. And so, and also the idea of symbiosis and that relationship that mistletoe has to the tree it grows on. Someday, Allison, I'm sorry I didn't bring the actual thing, not that that would have helped through Zoom.
And so is the mistletoe also present faintly in the background of the image on the right?
Yeah,
too?
I believe with, so with my sort of recontextualizing past work, it was something that I kind of, like a new way of working that I kind of happened upon in John Lee's personal formation class last fall. And just the ability to layer and do things digitally with different digital and print components, but obviously I had to scan the original paper print. But yeah, you should be able to, I think, see some of the mistletoe behind the raindrops, raindrop tears. Thanks, Micah.
Awesome. Any other comments or questions? Also, Monique, I don't know if you saw my chat, but I don't know if you were also here when we started, but we can go back to your poem now.
Hey, Jennifer.
Yeah.
I actually have another meeting at 1.
no.
Sorry, I have to go. But thank you, everyone. This was awesome.
Well, thank you for being here. And also, I loved your poem.
Thank you.
We can talk about it later.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, this is Angelique, who I don't think is here. So we will keep on. And this is Carly's. Chris Maroney. Melissa.
Yeah, this is station 13, where Jesus is taken off of the cross. And when I first did this piece, it's actually 2 pieces. So I started with the creation of I used wool and some silk fiber and wet felted a gray and black background. And so it basically, I don't know, I think there was some black and white movement in there, streaks like rain, like the personification of weather and this horrible death that Jesus was experiencing on Good Friday. And I had that just black and gray piece laying out. And my daughter came over one day and she didn't know what this was for or anything, but she glanced at it and said, "Wow, that looks apocalyptic." And it made me stop and kind of think, okay, as a mother, what would it be like to witness that horrific death of your child? What would you feel as that child is taken off the cross and laid in your hands? And I think at that moment, there would be such relief that agony and suffering was over. And so I thought, okay, I can't do that black background. And so then I went to I needle felted this small piece. You can kind of see it. It's almost like a window into what we see going on. And I thought it's got to have color, it's got to be brighter, it's got to be more joyful or show relief as opposed to all that darkness that was happening before. So I redid the piece and then I just had it laying by the black one. And I thought, these two kind of merge. And so I kind of placed it so that you can kind of see the brown of the cross as it's merging into the black at the shroud or cloth up at the top is partly on the gray background, but extends over into the window piece. So you can kind of see where those the yellow piece is put down on top of the black. And for people who, in the Christian tradition, we know that that moment is not the end of the story. And so that's why I had the bright yellow in the background, because we know that there's been, that there's more to come, and it's life-giving, and it's a bright future compared to that apocalyptic scene that was taking place in that morning. So that's how I came up with that piece.
Thank you. I really was struck when I first saw this too, about how that little window is just skewed slightly. I think is really, it's subtle but really effective, that it's not just this straight on thing. So there's a kind of like visual energy to that. I don't know. And I could also see the yellow operating as a gold, thinking of Micah's love of gold. No, that it has a spiritual kind of, in addition to being sunny. I mean, thinking of the rising sun, thinking of the next thing, like you're saying too. Micah loves the depth and texture. Elizabeth posted about the tenderness in the image, which I agree, it feels very sweet. Max made a connection between your piece and Elizabeth O's piece. The human figures are smaller for Elizabeth. The non-human beings of the birds bear witness here. I think the sky and earth/climate beings as bearing witness. I like that. Yeah. Kara says, such love, keep thinking of George Floyd and his mother.
Yeah.
And then Max followed up, something not as human focused about both pieces, even though they have human beings. Yeah, that's interesting. There's human beings at the center of both images, but it feels framed or more than that. That's great. Anybody else comment or? If you post them in the chat, then I'll just read them. And Stephanie posted, I love how the felt makes the whole world around the figures look like it's alive, soft, fleshy. It is such a great texture. And two, I mean, actually, Melissa, would you talk a minute about like what those two felting processes are like? I think you mentioned two different, right? One was needle and one.
Yeah. So I can kind of show you it is a fabric. You create a fabric with wool, but I take wool roving that looks like this in different colors, and then I lay it out, and with a process of soap and water, start to create, the fibers start to enmesh. Wool fibers have spikes or barbs in them, and the water kind of opens those pores, those spikes, and so they, as you agitate them, they grasp together and create felt through that process. And so that's how I did the gray background. The small window piece was done on a piece of felt itself, and this is all wool and some silk fibers. You use a needle that has barbs on it. So the barbs in the needle, as you compress the fibers down, it grabs onto the barbs in the wool, and it's kind of like painting with those wool fibers to create that needle felted part. And that's does not involve a water technique. It's lots of fun. It's therapeutic. And when I teach classes, I always include a Band-Aid, because inevitably someone will stab themselves.
Yeah, it was, I remember you doing some demonstrations at Arts Lunch, and it was really, it's the kind of thing you can quickly lose yourself in because it's so like kind of repetitive and process based. Carl just says that it's kind of reminiscent of a funerary shroud. And actually, I don't know if you've ever seen an epitaphios textile, Melissa. I should show you an image of that, or anybody can, like, you can Google it, but it's something that started in early Christian history. As it has a shared origin with a little fabric that covers the Eucharistic elements before that part of the liturgy, and then they came to be decorated in different ways. And so then the epitaphios is a large wall, well, it's sometimes hung on the wall, but it's a large textile that has the dead body of Jesus laid out on the stone of unction, where he's prepared for burial. And it is processed during liturgies during Holy Week, so after Good Friday, and then will be laid on the altar as a tomb. And then the gospel book is put on top of it. I'm talking in the Eastern tradition, the Orthodox tradition. So it's still to this day is a textile that's used, but it has a long, long history in the liturgy that starts out as this little covering for the Eucharist. And then there's a funeral procession as part of, the Good Friday and Holy Saturday services, where the epitaphios is carried and processed with everybody following and singing and so on around the church. And then when you come back into the church, the epitaphios is held up and the congregates pass underneath it to come back into the church. So it's like this symbolic entering into the church through the death and resurrection of Jesus, all kind of very embodied. Anyway, it just occurred to me now looking at this that there's a kind of like link with the epitaphios textile. So you should.
Can you spell that for me?
Yeah, I can stick it here in the chat maybe. Oops, nope, because that's autocorrect. But it's related to it's related to epitaph.
Okay.
Same root word.
Okay.
Okay, I know I was missing some things in the chat there, and I know Elizabeth O had asked, where do you teach classes?
I teach them mainly through my church, but if anyone's interested, I am happy to accommodate. I have classes in April, and we do something different every month, and we just do it via Zoom. I send a kit out, I mail them out, or they pick them up, and then we do it during Zoom.
Well, that's great to know. So Elizabeth, maybe you could connect with Melissa. And that's also the kind of thing I know, I don't know if you ever wanted to share that in Monday morning or anything, Elizabeth or Melissa, but that would, depending on how big, maybe you don't want to go viral and have too many people sign up for it, but you could also probably share that in Monday morning or with Cindy Beth and the alumni things.
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah, but it's really, so there was one, let's see. And Don had commented that it's left with the impression of the Easter story yellow representing the resurrection from the tomb. Yeah, Ben seconds that. Wake shadow. I mean, this is very, consistent in Christian iconography. You think of images of the nativity as well, where the tomb and the manger are, the manger references the tomb, right? So it's this kind of already not yet, kind of foreshadowing that too. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Melissa, and thanks for sharing your felting wonders with us. So we have one more station, last but certainly not least. And Stephanie, I'm trying to figure out what would be the best way. Wait, Stephanie's still here.
Yes. Yeah, and if I'm not going to be
Oh, good, there you are.
We're past one.
No, we have to. Everyone has to stay to see. Do you happen to have an image ready, like that you could quickly pull up and share screen?
I have the actual thing behind me.
Oh, well, can you? Yeah.
How well that's the show, but I can just grab it and see what happens.
Okay. Otherwise, I could also pull up the.
Because otherwise my cat won't see it. Okay. No. So here's the whole thing. It's a triptych. Da-na-na. And I can kind of like, as I'm talking about different pieces, I can kind of zoom in on them. So it's based on the medium of triptychs, which is like so it's a personal devotional object meant for an altar. And we've been learning about them in my art history class. So I've been kind of obsessed with them. And also their kind of relevance now that we're all sort of worshiping and having sacred space in our homes, and our altars are taking on more of the weight in terms of our spiritual lives and practice. So that's what kind of attracted me to this form. In terms of the content, I mean, you'll see that the images here are of folks who have, I mean, it's basically a meditation on grief. And so a lot of the images here are kind of a meditation on personal and collective grief, the particular and political in that. And so these people have died as a result of violence, white supremacy culture, misogyny, kind of in recent history, but also historically in the United States. And so this actually started, I do assemblage art. So I kind of, much like Max was saying, I'm just really curious about what happens when you put different images together and what emerges from that. So also kind of like your process, Micah, is like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And this project definitely kind of took on a life of its own. It started by looking at images, because I have a Catholic heritage, but it's not something I practiced growing up. So I'm really curious about re-engaging with that lineage. And I was looking at the station in Jerusalem, the supposed site of the tomb, and looking at it, it looks very, you can't really see a tomb or anything that looks like what we think of this station, how it's represented. It's very Catholic kitsch. There's like lots of architecture around it and big candles and kind of this, basically a collage of different images that people have thought are important over the years, like a white Jesus, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. And it's intended as like a site of pilgrimage. That's kind of been this composite. And so I was thinking about, and then like, as I was thinking about how grief is just like this strange, mysterious process, and we're not super good at grieving at this time and place, and thinking about different public sites of grief, and thinking about the George Floyd Memorial. And then I had images up of that, of just this evolving site of community care and memorial and grief and community building, and how all of that has sort of like been layered on top of each other. And there's flowers there, and now there's a garden there, and there's, you know, dead flowers and the living flowers and photos. And so I was just kind of playing with all of these images and thinking about like what it means to grieve and why we have so much unprocessed grief, and who gets to decide when we move on, because in this moment they're also trying to like clear that space, the George Floyd Square. And it also, like, as I was making this project, was also when the shootings in Atlanta happened, and the project kind of took on a more like specific life in kind of responding to John Lee's invitation to take on this collective grief and feel that in your body, and know, and to be invited into like what it means to not have just your personal grief, but to also process and connect to this larger grief. And so it's kind of, it's an unanswered question, but it was basically just like my response to that call and sort of what happens when we put these images together and try to maintain the value of the life that the particular life that they represent, but also the bigger meaning that emerges when they are kind of like, when I'm picturing like all of these public memorials, like at the sites of those shootings, and the George Floyd Memorial, and even the Holy Sepulchre, like all sort of blending together. Yes. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about. And a lot of the images were taken from the Say Every Name project, which if you haven't looked at is really powerful. And I kind of allowed myself to just be overwhelmed by the fact that there's no way I could fit all of the images that should be included in this meditation. And they kind of spill off of this tiny piece. And I also, in the process, was like, I can't just print out these images. So I spent a lot of time like reading the articles that were written about their lives and seeing like how people have represented that. So it was kind of an intense process, but very meaningful in the end.
And then you set it up for the purposes of like what you submitted, the images you submitted, you set it up with candles and like, I mean, kind of created you created an altar space for it, right?
Yeah, I had a bunch of objects that looked like those, looked like some of the images of those memorials. So it was like at 2 a.m. when I finished it. It was like Sunday night, and I was like, no, I'm just gonna do this, and I just set it up and lit candles and just kind of sat with it for a while. Yeah, it was an interesting experience to do that alone when I was like trying to represent these more like public expressions of grief.
Right. Peregrine was asking if you could hold it up again.
Yes.
Well, it felt right that, because it's a image to be engaged with in that way, it felt very appropriate that then you set it up with candles and so on.
And that image of the main image that's sort of in the middle there, if people aren't familiar, is sort of this iconic image of Emmett Till's funeral and his mom grieving. And there's a really beautiful piece that's published in the New York Times magazine called, I think it's Black Life is a State of Mourning. I'm getting that wrong, but it's by Claudia Rankine, who's a poet and writer. And it's a really beautiful piece about like what it means to grieve and to have images of grief and how we express that, and race, and in particular, this sort of as a result of white supremacy culture and racism.
I like Peregrine's comment, all the photos rising together make me think of incense smoke. Like these visualized prayers kind of coming up. I also like how it starts from that figure seated holding an image, and it kind of feels like the rest of the images are fluttering out of that first image.
And your use of gold.
And your use of gold.
Your use of gold and,
so
and the halo, and I love the borders with the beautiful edges and then this little stars. Kind of just symbolic of, I think, people that have died or basically been killed. But I really just wanted to say I loved your process of building in this own meditation on the grief as part of it. When you said that you couldn't just print out the images and start making the triptych, you had to actually sit with the articles and absorb it in kind of a meditative grief way. So I think that's beautiful and really adds to it. I also want to see this in person. So I hope you save it. Can you talk a little bit about hinging things together? I know that's not as exciting to talk about maybe, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, there are no templates online for building triptychs. Apparently it's not a trendy thing yet. But the trick is you have to put the hinge like backwards and on the front. You can't put it on the back like you would kind of intuitively expect, because then it doesn't close. So that's
Interesting.
you need to know.
You're
Yeah.
gonna start the trend. Start with you, Stephanie.
Yeah, it was fun having an excuse to use some power tools also. That was important for the grief process.
One of my favorite things of all time back when I was still in theater world was just the simple but very satisfying act of using some 3-inch nails and pounding some 2x4s together, usually building a frame, you know, for platforms. And so you kind of line them up, you stand on top of them. I mean, that's how I would do it. Put my foot on top of where they're coming together to hold them in place. And then just a couple of real solid whacks. It's just one of the best things in the world. So we could maybe set up that, you know, when we're back on campus during finals week or something, to just like get a whole box or jar of 3-inch nails and whack some 2x4s together.
Yeah, it's very therapeutic.
Yeah. And Elizabeth also commented, similar to Elizabeth O, echoed Elizabeth J's comment about your process too. Back on campus, maybe in the fall. Well, thanks everyone. I know we've gone well over our time. I feel like it was worth it. It was really nice to have this space too, to hear from the artists and contributors and talk about your wonderful images. And thanks for doing this virtually. Next year, may we be in person for this exhibit as much as we can. So thanks everyone. We'll be back with Arts Lunch, actually Max, to be determined for next week's Arts Lunch. So if anybody has a burning desire for next week, let me know. Otherwise, have a blessed Holy Week, if that's your practice, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.